I brought today's guest on the show to help startups out there think differently about their marketing. Mahesh Grossman helps people get a book written and promoted so they can position themselves as authorities in their industries. We talk about this valuable approach to marketing and so much more. Mahesh Grossman, welcome.
Thank you.
Absolutely, I'm so glad. You're probably our first based outside of Dallas guest on the show. Just for a little bit of background for the audience there, Mahesh and I linked up through LinkedIn.
Right.
And it was great. We had a great conversation. And on this show we often have entrepreneurs, startups, and then we'll also bring people on who can really be a valuable resource to those folks. And I instantly put you in that category.
That's great, thank you.
And you happen to be in town. I thought this was fantastic. So I'm so glad this was able to work out.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here.
And now, Mahesh, you have a book, Write a Book Without Lifting a Finger, and that's sort of
my calling card.
Your calling card, exactly.
It separated me from all the other ghostwriters out there. Wow. And there are a few ghostwriting books out there, but it's a promise title, and it promises something that people want.
Yeah.
And because of the book, it took me all kinds of places. I've gotten clients out of people who bought my book from bookstores. I got on Fox News, and they called me a ghostwriting guru. It just takes me all kinds of places.
That's fantastic. And then explain to folks exactly what your specialty is right now.
So I work with credible experts and turn them into incredible authors through ghostwriting, publishing, book design, book marketing, book publicity, pretty much everything soup to nuts that you can think of. And my ideal client is somebody who's trying to grow their business.
Okay.
Because that's your business is where the really big money is.
Sure, absolutely.
If you publish a book with a New York publisher and it's a $20 paperback, you're getting $1.50 or something per book.
Right.
If your clients are worth, you're talking to startups, so the sky's the limit here, but let's say a client's worth $25,000. You only need 6 clients to get the same $150,000. I know of an advertising company that they were really frustrated that they were not reaching the level of people purchasing commercial time that they wanted to. I think they were hitting in the $10 million range for their budget. And they wanted to be in the $25 to $50 million range. And so the CEO, it was like a little 3-person company, wrote a book, gave it away for free. And one of the people he gave it to said, "Hey, I didn't know you guys knew all this stuff. I thought you were a little boutique firm." And they got a $7 million deal. Wow. Which led into the size of the kind of the campaign they wanted to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that's the critical point, and that's where I think my audience can really benefit is just to see that value. It's not about I've always wanted to tell this unicorn story one time. It's about this calling card, as you mentioned. It's a business card on steroids, right? It brands you as an authority. We're still in that world. If you have a physical book,
it makes a huge difference.
You're real all of a sudden.
I think of it as it's kind of a shamanic experience, because everybody else who's not an author of a printed book, we can't tell how much they know.
Sure.
But when I'm holding a 2-inch book or even a 3/4-inch book, whatever it is, people see that and they say, "Oh, wow, you really know that much." Right. And it just makes it tangible in a way that nothing else does. But the other thing that I think is important is before you even write the book, or as you're writing the book, it pays to be incredibly strategic. And there are a lot of different ways to be strategic. The first thing you have to figure out is, what do you want to have happen to you because of the book? And then you can start thinking about what your audience wants to have happen to them. But you want to, if you think from that place, you'll reach whoever it is you want to reach.
Give me an example of that.
Well, for example, if you are a CEO of a startup and there is a company that you'd really like to do a joint venture with, you know, you call, you do all these things, you're a salesman and you're one of many people. I mean, if you got this huge round of funding and everybody knows who you are, then that's probably a little easier.
Sure.
But I was a headhunter for 13 years in Silicon Valley, so I understand that world a little bit.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if you're not a huge, you know, you didn't get a huge round of funding, but you have something that's really great for someone, and you can write a book where you interview them for the book, you have a very different relationship than you would otherwise. It's your, first off, who doesn't like being interviewed for a book?
Sure.
Secondly, you're now a peer instead of a salesman, and their sales defense is not up. So that's one strategy. Another strategy is, who do you want referrals from? If you're a certified financial planner or something, or you're a consultant, but let's do certified financial planner. Sure. That's something everybody can understand. You want referrals from a real estate trust. I mean, the lawyer who does real estate trusts. So it would make sense to interview that person for your book and include a chapter that's all about them. And then you can go so far as buying stickers that say, including a chapter from Tom Morris on real estate trusts. And then you give Tom copies of the book.
Copies of the
well,
book.
And a little stand that he can give these out, and he is referring people to you without it happening. And if you do that with two or three, you can do that. And the nice thing about the stickers is, you can do that with 2 or 3 people, and everybody else gets the normal book.
Exactly. And then then there's the lawyer with the real estate trust. It's the banker down the road. It's you do that a chapter with each one.
Right. Who are, you know, not too many, but enough. But on top of that, you know, it's a great PR tool, because you want to seed, if you want your book to get you PR, it helps to seed PR stories, press releases in your book, because that'll give people, because you can send press releases out, and people will sometimes ask if it's in your book. I got turned down by the O'Reilly factor. This is so embarrassing. So I had done this press release in 2004, and I was relatively new to like having written something of my own and marketing it that particular way. And so I did Sordid Tales of Hillary and Her Ghostwriters. And they liked that a lot, because he loves to bash Hillary, or he did, probably still does. And they wanted to know if it was in the book. And I'd written the book a couple years ago, and I forgot, but it was in the book. But I didn't think it was.
Oh,
so
they turned it down just for that.
Right, but so it really helps to have some of these things in the book.
To make sure there's that tie-in for them. It makes a complete story. And
the other strategy is, you want to know, what is it that's important to the people you want to have as clients. I mean, it's always the old marketing, what's in it for me kind of thing.
Sure.
But the lovely thing about a book is that you make your title about what they want, but you can stick in all the other stuff you want.
Right.
Most books, my first book was a hair color book, and for Putnam, and the first half of the book was about hair color, and the second half was clothing and dressing and all these other things. It takes a bunch to fill a book. Right. And I'm sure you've read books, how-to books, that have a lot of filler at the end.
Sure.
The B-sides, so to speak.
Right.
If you're old enough to remember.
Yes, yeah.
45s. So,
and that's important, because something else that you brought up earlier. Sorry, we talked a lot before we started rolling here. But something else you brought up earlier was, which I thought was great for companies when they're thinking about branding, and how they explain that to me a little more.
I'm about to write a piece called "Does Your Branding Pass the Book Title Test?" And because there's a lot of strategies involved in creating a book title. You've only got about 6 or 8 words, and you have to stand out from the pack. You're living off the spine of the book. It doesn't matter what your title is if you're already famous and people already want your book. But if you're not, it's how to stand out. And I've been looking at a lot of LinkedIn profiles, and they kind of run into each other. I mean, I saw a bunch of people who did clean manufacturing. And, clean manufacturing is, everybody who does it, or lean manufacturing, I'm sorry. But everybody who does it. So, but it helps. It makes you stand out if you're original. So one technique is to kind of find a metaphor, like chicken soup for the soul, or men are from Mars, women are from Venus, which, it was the same dating advice everybody else had ever said. We all knew that, but it was such a great title that you had to buy the book, and it
Packaged beautifully,
sold millions upon millions of copies. But, it helps. One of the PR techniques is to tie into something that everybody's talking about. But so if you're a lean manufacturing person, maybe you should be the paleo manufacturing person.
There you go.
And that does 2 things for you. Number one, it just it sets you apart. B, it makes you look fun and like somebody you'd want to work with.
Right.
Unless you're trying to market to really straightforward people. But it's a really cool thing to do. Promises are a great thing. So my book is Write a Book Without Lifting a Finger, and that's a promise. And it helps you get people who want to write a book without doing any work, or it arouses curiosity. So you can place these things as taglines. You can use them as your headlines in your business. You can use them in some kind of description, but it really helps to have things that are more attractive. And so a book can help you create your branding in a whole new way. I know we worked with a guy who wrote a book called The Last Chance Millionaire, which was a financial book, and that book called forth an audience, and the name of his audience is The Last Chance Millionaires. Well, your marketing, if you could have kind of a special term
For your audience.
audience, that makes a huge difference. I have a friend who wrote a book called, or 2 friends who wrote a book called The Weekend Entrepreneur, and one of the 2 writers has a blog now for Entrepreneur Magazine with that name, because it's a perfect fit for Entrepreneur Magazine. On top of that, it just helps to think about who your audience is.
Right. It's a great way to clarify that and get down. I mean, everybody talks about the elevator pitch and have that down, and all that's absolutely important. But I love the context of, even if you never write a book, to think about it in those terms, because there's such a correlation, like you said, of getting found amongst all the noise, all the other books, getting found as a company. There's a lot of correlation there.
Right. I mean, if you have an incredibly unique product that everybody wants, your branding doesn't matter if you're that different.
Sure.
The iPhone, it could be called anything. The iPod could have been called anything. It was still going to sell. It was exactly what they may not have even known they wanted it, but they did.
Right.
And but if you're competing,
those are the exceptions. Yeah.
If you're competing, and so I ask a lot of questions of people. One of the things that makes me a little different from most ghostwriters, and my firm different, because I only write a couple books a year myself, and I have other. First off, we match people. Okay. So we're looking for someone that has written books in the same realm that you're looking to write a book in, and that's really important.
Sure.
But the second thing, and maybe more important, is we ask all kinds of questions up front. That, what do you want to have happen to you? How do you want it to happen? And it's hard to do this from here because nobody's answering.
Right.
So,
but this is great, because I think where you're going with is how much those are questions you should be answering for your business anyway.
Right.
Right?
Right. And you just, it just makes a huge difference. Books can be a tremendous, you can't get PR about your company maybe once or twice. It's hard to talk about a product. It just looks like promotion. But if your book is a how-to or a business book and it's got different angles that you can talk about.
And you become an expert in
Yes.
that area.
And you can pitch stories over and over again. And different angles. It also helps you build more content. You can use your book to create content for your blog, for all these other things. And content for, the Huffington Post or for trade magazines.
Sure.
And then what you can do to kind of put it on hyper steroids or something is, that's so marketing. But there are a couple companies. One is called Outbrain and one is called Storylift. And I know a little more about Storylift. But basically they find who is like a company that Storylift talks about. I had an article in a golf magazine about a putter that the accuracy wasn't necessarily as strong, but how far you could putt with was really better than anything out there.
Okay.
And what Storylift did was they looked for statistics to find other places where you would find those people with that personality type who played golf. And then if you ever look on the web and there's other recommended stories, your story becomes the other recommended story.
Ah, okay. So services like that can get you in that way.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and it costs money, but if a client is worth a lot, if a customer is worth a lot, it's worth it. It's books are it's very rare for people to sell thousands upon thousands of books. In fact, I think 95% of books sell 1,000 copies or less.
Yeah.
So, there were only 300 something books on the New York Times bestseller list in 2014, I think it is.
Okay.
Now, before that, there were about 400, but they cut the number of books per category.
Ah, okay.
So, people think they have a best-selling book, and it's like, if publishing companies knew, they would definitely be making a lot more money. I mean,
But nobody knows.
nobody knows. Randy Jackson had a book from American Idol, and I saw some statistics, and I don't know the exact. I have a little formula I used that I could find, kind of make a guesstimate of how many
On
books.
the rankings on Amazon and things like that? Or?
No, it's actually through the warehouses.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
The distributors. And it used to be you could just look up any book and see how many copies this one distributor, which is the main distributor, sold.
Gotcha.
And on a traditionally published book, you multiply by like 2.5.
Okay.
And on a self-published book, you multiply by less than that. But the way I looked at when I looked at how many books Randy Jackson on the number one show at the time, I think he sold a few thousand books. He certainly sold under 10,000 books.
Wow. And if he can't be a guaranteed, or somebody like that can't be a guaranteed hit, then there are no guarantees, right?
Yeah. And the other thing is traditional publishing is an issue. In general, in some ways it gives you more credibility, in some ways it doesn't. Primarily these days it doesn't.
And so, we know the publishing industry is shifting, changing, crashing, growing other areas. Is there still more credible with the traditional publisher in all cases, or not?
Not in all cases. Now that Oprah has a different format, it used to be that she really wanted you to have a traditional publisher because she wanted to make sure there were enough books to go around once you were on, and it can really
That was
be
the launch.
expensive.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, if you're self-publishing 30,000 books,
Right.
not everyone can afford that. But today, today there's ebooks. Today there's I offer kind of a hybrid version because nobody knows that my publishing company is a hybrid version because it's kind of small, and you're among about 50, 60, 70 books.
What does that mean, a hybrid version?
Well, in other words, I can get books into bookstores,
Okay.
so it's co-published, but it's but it's not the same as self-publishing because I'm involved, and we get the books in bookstores, but you're paying for the cost of publishing.
Sure. But it gives you that credibility of being in a bookstore. And
But even if you're not in the bookstore, I mean, in many cases, I tell clients, give away your book.
yeah.
A book is worth so much more to you than the couple of dollars. Yeah.
So what are kind of the numbers with like a self-publishing and publishing?
If you co-publish through me, you make about 25% per book. So on a $20 book, you're making $5. If you self-publish on your own and can't get it, if you self-publish an ebook on Amazon and you price it right, and it's a small company, you can make as much as 70%.
Sure.
So that can be really useful. And in fact, if a client doesn't want books in bookstores, then I recommend they do it themselves, and we'll take care of all the design issues and things like that.
Gotcha.
And a traditional publisher, I mean, there are just so many sad stories of how poorly traditional publishers have done. I knew a guy, I heard a story about a guy from somebody who was on a bus with him that had a New York Times bestseller, but it was only a bestseller for the week because they ran out of books, the traditional publisher. And then it would hit the bestseller list again. And they ran out of books again. And it wasn't like this crazy, it wasn't like Go Set a Watchman, which is 1.1 million books in the first week. This was, a book about what you could learn from stuff related to the White House.
Okay.
And on a more personal side. They just don't always know what they're doing. There's another book, somebody who was an anchor on a morning show, a somewhat smaller anchor, but 900,000 copies, 900,000 viewers.
Right.
He didn't get, when he worked with a publicist from the publishing company, they just pitched him to other shows on this channel that he was already in. And
like I could have gotten.
oh well, and you have to understand. I've been to this station because I'm friends with one of the producers, and like a giant football field with little puddles of desks on each side, and his publisher didn't. He could have thrown books at people. Right. He could have scheduled something in the urinal at the urinal.
Right.
I mean, we're not talking. But when he hit the bestseller list, then they turned their machine on. But I mean, if you're a regular person and you're not in front of 900,000 people,
right? They're not turning on the machine just to
right.
But that's really the story I hear over and over again from writers, published and not, that anymore, even if you're going with these traditional publishers, like they sign you, they love you. If that happens, here you go, awesome, we'll do this. Now, how are you going to promote the book? And you're sitting there as an author going, I thought that was your job. Like, what? And they're like,
right,
no, you need to have a
right.
following. You have to go promote it.
Well, that's the thing. If you really want a traditional publishing deal, you write something called a book proposal. And it's basically a synopsis of your book, a chapter from your book, and your marketing plan, and how well known you are. And that's how they decide who gets a book for nonfiction. For fiction, it can be different. I mean, there was a book called The Historian, kind of a Dracula-ish thing, and a lot of people liked it a lot, and they bought it for $1 million, and it was a bestseller.
Nice.
But that's not an everyday story.
Microscopic percentage of.
I mean, on some level, if you can get a novel published by a traditional publisher, that really helps because it's harder to self-publish and market a novel. Although some people are having success, especially if they have series of books.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back too real quick to something you mentioned when you talked about just giving your book away and getting folks first in the mindset that you can be an author, you can do this, and I want you to kind of jump into the details of that. But then also don't get into the mindset of like, okay, awesome, this is how I'm going to go make money now, and this is a marketing tool. And I mean, you mentioned a couple of when we were talking earlier, you mentioned a vegan restaurant that they sold theirs and stuff, but it was, what was it? They didn't go any kind of traditional way.
No, they had a client of mine that I helped with the publishing side had a vegan cookbook, and they had a chain of 20 to 25 restaurants, and vegetarians love vegetarian cookbooks.
Yeah. And
vegans especially love them because they're less vegan cookbooks, and they bought enough books to sell at the store for a very long time, and they said no ebook, no Amazon, because the book is way more. If you have a retail outlet,
yeah,
you can have 500 stores or 900 stores. The book actually can be a tremendous asset in a lot of different ways. I mean, I usually talk to clients of that size and I come in with an idea as to what could they do to promote the book from a PR standpoint in ways that you can't see any other way.
Right. You can't just promote the restaurant or the store or the.
Right. And the book can become a profit center. If you understand what your customers really want in terms of a book that would be interesting to them. It can be a little cash register book. It can be a way to get their email address if you haven't gotten it any other way. Although these days it's getting more and more sophisticated than when I first started talking about that. Sure. But you can gain a lot of favor with a client or a customer. And God, people remember books. And I mean, I had a guy who sold advertising on this radio talk show, this list of jokes and commentary that went out to AM radio talk show hosts. And he sent me his book. And not many of my clients would fit that version of life, but some do. And I could never remember his name. I could not for the life, but I remembered the name of his book and where it was on my bookshelf. So I would go look him up and call him. A book has a certain kind of longevity if it's something if there's some reason you're interested in the person.
Yeah, and if you leave your book after a meeting with a prospect, or you go have lunch with someone, like, oh hey, I just brought you a copy of the book. I mean, that's not getting thrown away, right? I mean, it's going on a shelf. It's going on your desk for a while. It's going.
I had a client who said his book after 2008, 2009, when things were really falling apart, saved his company, and he did a whole campaign where he'd write to people and he'd say, look, I'd like to offer you a copy of my book, and what I'll do is come in and meet with you, and if you can refer me to one other person, I'll give you a copy of my book. And he said that book saved his company.
That's great.
And
wow.
that was the one book we did that didn't wind up in bookstores, because he came with a title, and the title he came with was great for his business, but it wasn't. And I got a little bit hypnotized by his title, I think, and so I missed that it wasn't that easy to understand. But usually, I'm a fighter with I have this curmudgeonly side. Believe it or not, but if you've would ever hear me on the phone, I get a lot of calls from wannabe authors. people sign up for my mailing list at publisherbusinessbook.com, and they can get a free appointment. I also have a mailing list, getanagentnow.com, where you can get a free list of literary agents. So I was doing some stuff with wannabe authors. So I can be, people will tell me, I know I have a bestseller, and it's like, oh, okay. Random House has a job for you, because
Exactly. That's
they don't
what I was
know what a
gonna say.
bestseller is. So I'm glad you know. And so when I tell somebody, that's a book that has a market. It could even possibly be a traditionally published book, because there's a hole in the market. You found a place that there's no book out there that covers that, but yet there's a need. So you're okay. I can't guarantee that.
Sure.
Because it's just, it's much better if you have a built-in following. But when I tell somebody, hey, that's a great idea for a book, I really mean it. At the same time, I'll fight with people who are my clients, and I will say, hey, what you want to do doesn't work, or you could do that better, or it's not right for your audience.
Right.
And
Or just shift the title,
change the title.
Yeah.
God, yeah. Well, I love people pay me a lot of money for title consultations, and they use the titles, and it's something that's really easy for me. And I'll tell people ahead of time, look, I'll fight you tooth and nail, but you're the client and you win. But if you don't let me tell you what I'm thinking, then you're losing out because you're paying me.
Right.
And I do a lot of big picture stuff with people. The other thing we do that's really kind of cool is I have a new partner that I'm working with who does a 10-day bestseller campaign for your book. And the big thing is not, and it's an ebook, but the big thing is you have to have a back-end product that's worth $600 to $1,000, and
perfect,
perhaps
yeah.
a second product that's worth $5,000 to $10,000. And he charges a certain amount of money, and it's expensive, but he actually creates advertising campaigns on various places using that money, and throws in some of his own money, and he finds out what works. And you have, in the first 10 days, he takes you probably get 2/3 of what your stuff, whatever you sell for,
Gotcha.
and he gets 1/3, or we get 1/3. And but after that 10 days, you have an advertising campaign that you can throw money at that works.
Yeah, you just keep
And
feeding that.
he's done this for 40-something books.
Wow.
So, and I mean, to my mind, overall, it's not a very high price if you have the wherewithal and if you're building a business to do that kind of thing.
Right. And you see that big picture
Yeah,
aspect to it.
yeah. It's like a lot of people are promoting e-ticket rides. Well, back in the day when they had e-ticket rides, but a lot of fun. You can become an Amazon bestseller, and we can offer that to people. But you're number one in the category of historical French romance,
Right.
and I don't know if that means a lot.
Right.
And having an Amazon bestseller, it doesn't, if you have a USA Today bestseller, and I have a partner who actually can do that for you, but it's very complicated and expensive. So there's a bunch of things you can do.
Yeah. And so describe to me the process.
How you write a book with a ghostwriter?
Exactly. And come in, they want to work with you and do that.
Well, the funny thing about the process is we customize it.
Okay.
So it's different with everybody. But if I had my druthers, the process is over the phone. Now, it depends. Like if you have research or videos or CDs or audio products or podcasts, that we can work with those. If you have a bunch of research, I just had a client talk to me today about, man, I've got about 600 pages worth of reading for the person who writes this book so they understand what I'm talking about.
Good grief.
Well, but it's a very technical
Yeah.
field,
Okay.
and that makes sense. But generally, if you're writing a book off the top of your, if you're trying to pull what's in here out into the world, we basically will interview you for an hour a day until we have an outline. And some people it can be just one time, and some people it can be 3 or 4 times.
Gotcha. So walk me through. We'll give you mentioned earlier, it's more helpful with a actual sort of role playing almost with it. So let's say I own a co-working space.
Okay.
Here in Dallas. I want to write a book that differentiates me. I can get more clients for that co-working. I can partner up with other people. What is that? I call you, and what is that process?
And so we'll talk about what is an ideal client for you. And I have friends who wrote that book, and I forget what it's called at this point, but former mayor of Santa Cruz owns a place with another friend of mine called Next Space, which is a chain of co-working spaces. And it's tips for the solo entrepreneur and the small business person, basically. What do you need to do? What kind of networking do you need to do? How do you get clients? It's those kinds of things. You have to ask, what do people want when they're in a co-working space? And also, what do you want to, if you want people to become co-working people, then you want to have lots of stories about the success of being in a co-working space. So when I was at Next Space, I got a client that has been profitable for several years now and more than paid for my rent. And I had people who did my business cards. Then I did my new logo for me. And so you have relationships with people and how to use the relationships internally. So if I were to counsel somebody who was doing a co-working environment, which actually I know something about, having actually worked in a co-working environment for 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
The first thing is, what are the benefits of co-working? First off, I would ask, what do you want to have happen to you? But it's kind of obvious you want.
Sure, but it may be that. It may be the obvious one would be, I want more people to come to my co-working space and rent out space, right?
Right. But it could be something else. I want to do seminars on networking. I want to attract people who are into networking, because our co-working space is different. We have Next Space had a happy hour every Friday, and you really got to know the other people working there.
Yeah.
And because of that, deals happened. And you also got people that you trusted to do, like my business card comes out of somebody who worked at Next Space with me. So part of it is, how do you create, part of it may be, you could do a book on how to create a great corporate culture, even in a co-working space.
Sure.
Because that's what they specialize in. That's their special sauce. So, they did, actually, the owners of that company did a book, and I don't remember what it's called, but it could also be a marketing book.
Just for your space there and everything, right?
Yeah, and how to make the most of a co-working space.
Sure. So you would ask that, like that. So that's step one. You ask them, what's your goal with this? So they define it. Hey, I want to get more people to come to my co-working space. Then what's the next step after that?
Well, then we come up with I ask questions. What kinds of things do you want to have inside your book? What do people love about co-working? What are the pitfalls of co-working? What can you do to? I mean, it depends on the book. This is kind of a very soft
Sure.
topic, but part of it is, they're usually people who come with usually have some idea of what they want to write about. I'll say, well, so they'll give me a list of things that they want as well, and then I'll say, what about this? And what about that? And how do you create joint ventures to promote a team of people? Can you do something, and you tell your great stories. I mean, part of what having a book does is it's your best salesperson.
Right.
And it tells your best stories, and it tells them exactly the way they're supposed to be told,
Right.
as opposed to somebody
Screw
coming
it up.
along. Yeah. So that's really important too. But for bigger stuff, you want to be as strategic as you can, and you want to understand your customer as well as you can, but you have to understand them from the perspective of a book. This is the kind of thing that I have a kind of strange knack for, because I was a headhunter for 13 years. So I spent 13 years talking about what other people wanted in their employees and what employees wanted, and you find out their hot buttons, and you begin to understand what works for people and what doesn't work for people.
Right.
And there's this just kind of intuitive thing. And so when I started my ghostwriting business, I brought those same skills, which include matching people up with somebody that you think they'll really like, but also understanding. You talk to me about your customer base. I'm going to understand some things that maybe even you don't understand about your customer base, but when I say it, you'll say, "Oh yeah, that's true. I never thought about that."
Right.
So,
and that's so valuable.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that could be valuable to your whole product line.
right. Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that brings up another great point of, getting this out there. A book, if you have it out there in any kind of way, you develop an audience that you didn't have before, and then you start getting feedback from that audience.
And they love you so much. They know you so much. I've been on the phone with people, and I start to tell them a story, and they say, "Oh yeah, I read that in your book." I'm like, "Oh man, that's frustrating." But they remember your stories. Yeah. I remember there's this writing book, Natalie Goldberg, and the first book is Writing Down the Bones. It's a classic kind of Zen meditation / writing book. And she came out as a lesbian halfway through the second book. And I was furious, because I thought I knew her well enough halfway through the first book that she could have told me.
How funny.
Yeah, and it was true.
But you feel that, it's like that's how you get connected. Through a page, through a book, whether you've met someone or not, you get that connected and enveloped.
Yeah, I mean, she didn't even know she was until that point in the book, but it was like, I was still offended.
Well, this is great. So how does someone reach out to you, and if they're realizing like, hey, this is either they have a book in mind and they want to reach out, or if this interview has sparked something and they want to talk through that some more, like what is that process?
I do free consultations.
Okay.
On publishyourbusinessbook.com. Okay. Your business book doesn't have to be a book about business. It just has to be a book about your business.
Nice.
So
that's a great distinction. I like that.
I helped It's Just Lunch do 50 books. The It's Just Lunch Guide to Dating in New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Dallas, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, there are places I'm probably going to try and go to because of the Dallas book.
Nice.
It was a dating book, but it actually added value to their company, and they sold the company. And I heard that they felt really good about having 50. I mean, most people only have one book.
Right.
So 50 books is a lot. And the funniest thing on this was there used to be a TV show called The OC, and we had this Just Lunch Guide to Dating in Orange County. And it was on the set. Like, you could see it in a shot. Somebody had picked it up.
That's great. So they can go to publisherbusinessbook.com.
They can call me at 831-428-2846.
Awesome. We'll get all this in the show notes for people to check out for sure.
I also have www.authorsteam.com.
Authorsteam.com.
If they want a free list of literary agents, they can go to getanagentnow.com.
Wonderful. I love all of this from the perspective for the audience to really think differently when it comes to building their business, growing their, on the marketing side, the public relations side, because there's so many traditional things that click and make sense for folks, but they don't always think in these terms of making themselves an authority in their space and instant differentiation.
Yeah, and there's so much you can learn from this stuff. Go Set a Watchman sold 1.1 million copies. Right. And the first thing I learned from that is make sure your customers or your clients really love your product. Right. And they'll wait 50 years
exactly.
to buy it. But what that informed me about was, hey, if you're doing white papers or free ebooks or free consultations, you really want people to love what you're giving them. A lot of people worry, I'm going to give away all my information for free. I can't do that. That's free consulting. But it's like in this day and age, people remember, and you develop a relationship with them.
Yep.
And, I Go Set a Watchman. Well, To Kill a Mockingbird was taught in schools.
Right.
So it helps to have a partner to recommend
right.
your books. But to really go after that kind of thing, or to recommend whatever it is you have, dentists and your toothpaste and toothbrush are another category of that. And referral partners are another category of that.
Well, yeah, and two, it brings up another aspect of, in the traditional, quote unquote, traditional way of thinking on, let's say, still a nonfiction book, you go after some sort of celebrity in that space to maybe give you a testimonial or thing on the jacket or a review that you can put in there. But if you're in cement and you are writing a book, well, maybe it's that top manufacturer in that's that blurb. It's that same thing. You think in those same terms.
Well, but the other thing is, I have a really cool trick. You don't have them write the blurb about the book. You have them write the blurb about you.
Interesting.
So now, if you've got Brad Pitt saying that you were the world's greatest networker, as opposed to your book about he loves your book about networking. Wow, you can use that in all your marketing material. And then
and for 3 different books.
Every book, yeah. It's a really different. It's like everything is strategic.
Yep.
And most people don't think strategically. People ask me, what's the difference between you and just a freelance writer? And I mean, I have 2 or 3 differences. One is we do soup to nuts, everything you can want. Secondly, we care more about your business than we do, not more, but as much about your business as we do about your book. So we're thinking strategically along with you. Mm-hmm. And the third is we've got a team. So your book is going to get edited, your book is going to get proofread. I mean, I had a client who worked with one of my New York Times best-selling ghostwriters. And when I read the book, there was a chapter that A, sounded like a book report, and B, it was about the experience economy, and all of the experiences were negative. And the client had read the book, and the writer's a good writer. He,
Sure.
New York Times bestseller, that counts for something, and he'd been writing books forever. He just didn't see it.
Wow.
Neither one of them saw it, but I saw it. I was like, oh, yeah, this is negative. Let's and I wrote a few pages because I had a really cool experience economy story from the restaurant in Santa Cruz that has a trolley that goes down this garden that wins best restaurant to take tourists to every year, in spite of the fact that it's not near the ocean and like everybody else. And the food is okay, and it's really expensive.
But it's the experience, yeah.
Right.
That's great. But that kind of catch like that you bring as rather than just like you had a task, did it, here's your book, bye.
Right. And also it's just really about how do we make this a high-end book? Because most of my clients are reaching people who are worth a lot of money to them. Mm-hmm. And so you want as much high value as possible. And so it helps to have multiple people involved and multiple strategies involved. And
Sure. Well, I love this. I love the service that you're offering, and the whole mindset that goes into that. So I appreciate you being on the show, and thanks so much for sharing this with my audience.
thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Like I mentioned in the interview, this is about so much more than writing a book. It's about opening your eyes to new ways of marketing your company and yourself. There are so many fun and inventive ways to put yourself out there as an authority in your industry.